to our panel on bridging the digital divide, the very first session in our week long event, DPI in Conversation. When Aadhaar or UID was first brought into the picture, it was pushed as a project that would ameliorate social welfare delivery through digitization. In the past 15 years or so, we have seen Aadhaar become a foundation for DPI in India and have witnessed its continued expansion and linkage across various services. Taking the Aadhaar or the UID project as an example, we will be exploring how India's DPI model has impacted the digital divide in our country and changed the relationship between technology, rights, and social welfare delivery. Now, without further ado, it is my honor to introduce a distinguished panel of speakers for today's session. Firstly, we are joined by Dr. Ritika Khera, who is Narendra and Chandra Singhi Chair and Professor of Economics at the IIT Delhi. In 2020, she was awarded the Malcolm Edisacia Award for Distinguished Contribution to Development Studies. Her research is focused on social policy in India, and she has published extensively on food security, health and child nutrition, employment, and education. Her work on technology and welfare culminated in an edited collection titled Descent on Aadhaar Big Data Meets Big Brother. Secondly, we have with us Ms. Usha Ramanathan. She is an independent legal researcher who works on the jurisprudence of law, poverty, and rights. Her work draws heavily upon non-governmental experience in its encounters with the state, and she has been tracking and engaging with the Indian UID project over the years. She is also the visiting faculty at various universities, including Azim Premji University, Nalsar, Ashoka, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and Institute of Law at Nirmal. She has been called upon by the National Judicial Academies in Bhopal and Delhi to address judges on various issues lying at the intersection of law, poverty, and technology. Thirdly, we have with us Aditi Agrawal, an independent journalist who has been reporting on issues related to privacy, surveillance, cybersecurity, online free speech, and big tech regulation for the last 6 years. She has previously worked at Hindustan Times, Forbes India, News Laundry, and Medianama, and has written for Al Jazeera, The Hindu, and The Print. Now, I invite our esteemed panelists to provide their opening remarks on the topic. In the interest of time, I have apologies for this. I would request you all to take 4 minutes for the same. Ritika, if you could go first, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Um, so I should say at the outset, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I worked on Aadhaar for many years and then I just gave up because things were not moving, and in fact, they got worse. And I've not really kept up with the literature or the developments since 2020, I would say. So these terms that you've used in your email, at least to us, DPIs and DPGs, I'm just assuming that it's just a reincarnation of Aadhaar. But very quickly, then let me move on to what we do know about Aadhaar based on this 15 years of research. The first thing I would say is that it's pretty evident that this garb, it was a Trojan horse, this welfare spiel around Aadhaar, that it would reduce corruption, it would bring efficiency, and it could therefore also be a tool of equity, because if you weeded out all the corruption, then more funds would be available for redistribution. So we know now that that was just a sales pitch. They had, first of all, they couldn't in principle have contributed. And then, of course, the way it was implemented, it made matters worse. So I would say in that sense, it was a bad project, bad tech, and it was bad tech implemented by a weak government system, therefore also very badly implemented. What are the barriers that it has created? I think at various levels. Earlier, like 5 years ago, when I would give talks on Aadhaar, I would say Aadhaar has introduced 3 new hurdles between people and them claiming their entitlements. And those 3 new hurdles were enrollment into Aadhaar, linking Aadhaar with the relevant registry, like whether it's the public distribution system or Narega or pension, bank accounts, etc. And then the third hurdle was that for some of these benefits, they were expected to authenticate themselves each time they access these benefits. So if you went to take your ration, you had to. But now I would say that it has added even, there are even more hurdles that have become evident between them and the finishing line. And one of these, which is understudied, I think, is the fact that now people are being asked to update their records. Now there are signs saying, is your Aadhaar up to date, and make sure that it's up to date. And people get caught in this web, because updation is not necessarily easy. When people lose their cards, of course, it's almost impossible for some of them to get a duplicate copy out again. As far as consent is concerned, I think it's a bit of a joke. It's a joke even for educated people like us in many contexts. But for poor people who need those rations, they'll give consent. So it's not informed consent, it's forced consent to the extent that there is any consciousness of giving consent at all. Often it's just something nobody pays attention to. And this idea that, okay, now you're consenting to your data being used in a by some third party for some, that, I mean, that's very hard to explain to anyone. There's another thing which I've been recently working on, and then maybe I'll stop because there's only 2 minutes, is maybe a couple of things. One is we've been talking to frontline health workers in Rajasthan a little bit, and then Andhra, and most recently in Chhattisgarh. And the auxiliary nurse and midwife, the ANMs, in some of these states, they have apps on their phone where they're being told to do all kinds of data entry. To some extent, it's displacing them from their ability to do their own work. Like, instead of doing home visits and doing breastfeeding counseling, etc., they are having to focus on data entry in the app. So it's reducing the time that's available to do their own work. But what's worse is that some of the data entry is geotagged, GPS enabled. So if they say, yes, I have visited Usha and counseled her on breastfeeding, but if Usha's house is in a place that doesn't have connectivity, and we both go to a hilltop to be able to mark the home visit as being done, the nurse got a show cause notice saying, why shouldn't her services be terminated? Because she is actually just cooking up the data. Her GPS is 300 meters away from Usha's house. So those kinds of things are hard to document. We can only do that much documentation, and basically, because it's based on anecdotes or small surveys, etc., it's also weakening the ability to push back against the propaganda that comes from the Aadhaar lobbies. There's also more to say about many different things, but I'll stop. I know I've exceeded my time.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Ritika. Next, I'd like Usha ma'am to proceed with her opening thoughts on this topic.
Yeah. I'll just take off from where Reetika left off. So this digital public infrastructure, each of them, I think, each word has a significance in this. By pushing everything onto the digital, they've created a whole universe in which they can conduct their businesses. And public is having all of public data onto that digital. And it's also making data into a public good. And then for infrastructure, ages ago, even when the Supreme Court case was going on, Mr. Nilekani had clarified in a Hindustan Times article in January 2018, when he was speaking up for businesses being allowed, companies being allowed to use the UID database for their own work. He had said that this is like the road, this is like any other infrastructure. We're just creating the infrastructure and then you can build many things on it. It was the same Mr. Nilekani who also very, he kind of introduced us to this idea that in this country, people don't have anything, no wealth, nothing that they can offer to the market. What they have is their data. So the data should flow up and then they will make businesses out of it. And the Sri Krishna Committee report is even, the title of the report itself is about creating a data economy. So I think we should, when we're thinking about digital divide, I think one of the things also is all that Reetika is saying comes to pass because, like she herself has indicated, that's not the point. The point is not really taking care of people who require various services. it is something else. Something else is the point. And I think the most blatant admission of what it is that they are doing came in 2025 when they changed the governance rules. So if you remember, when the Supreme Court passed its judgment, it said that companies cannot use this data. Private companies cannot use this data and can't use this database. So they then next year in 2019, they passed one amendment to the act which would allow them to use it offline, as if that would change the nature of that decision that had been given by the court. So in that, they had said that this data will be used in the interest of good governance, preventing leakage of public funds, promote also including promoting ease of access of residents and enabling better access to services for them. In 2025, they have removed the words. They have actually said, we are removing the words in the interest of good governance and preventing leakage of public funds. So it can be one of the things, if you want, you can use it, but that is not the fundamental purpose for which you have you have the UID database being used. So it's kind of out in the open. We also know that through G20 and after, they have been pushing for this DPI to be the big product that they are selling to the world. And all of us know that when you're marketing a product, you can't be marketing it along with saying what is the problem with it. So that's one of the reasons. I think Mr. Nilekani, again, in Hard Talk, he was a spokesperson for the project. So a lot of what we heard from him. In very early on, he had said, oh, we will not talk about surveillance. And then when somebody said, these are the problems with the UID, and so he said, why are you talking about Aadhaar? Mobile phone is even more pernicious. So they've been aware that all these problems exist. They have themselves known that biometrics will not work, and that's why they're imposing it only on the poor. So there is a whole thing to unpack for us to understand why the DPI has developed the way it has, how it's part of India Stack, how it's part of iSpert, how it's basically in 2021 when they had a meeting, for 3 years after the UID judgment called Aadhaar 2.0. There was actually a session in that called towards a digital economy, and the main speakers in that were Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma and Mr. AP Singh, both of whom said we have been there from the beginning and we know this was never meant for the government. It was meant to create a digital economy. So that's the background against which I think we'll have to also think about this project.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts, ma'am. Now, Aditi, if you could give your opening remarks on this topic.
Thank you, Pranay. Thank you, SFLC, for having me here. It's a really difficult job following Reetika and Usha ma'am, to be honest, given that I've looked up to their work for so long. But I'll try and make it quick. I want to focus on 3 points in my opening remarks. One, what does a DPI actually mean? Second, who decides what is DPI? And third, the role of consent, which is something that Ritika and Usha ma'am have already spoken about a little bit. So going off what Usha ma'am said about DPI, each of the words is really important. But what we have seen over the years is that DPI is a really amorphous term where anything and everything can be included. There is functionally, at least in my opinion, no distinction between what is a DPI, digital public infrastructure, what is digital public good, that is DPG, and what is India Stack. They all seem to interflow into each other as per convenience. So Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, DigiYatra, ONDC, AgriStack, and FASTag are definitely DPI. As per the abundant press releases from the government, even if they're not fully open sourced, not built on secure and resilient infrastructure, and are gatekept by a few individuals or companies or the state itself. And these are the terms, these are the parameters that I have taken from the G20 New Delhi Declaration on DPI from 2023. Now, at the Global Tech Summit hosted by Carnegie earlier this year in New Delhi in April, there was even talk about solving the problem of climate change using DPI for climate. I confess I don't understand what that means. There were attempts to make me understand. I'm sorry, I failed. The question that then arises is that when we're talking about digital infrastructure, which is supposed to act as a road for your other services, etc., as Mr. Nilekani said and Usha ma'am quoted, is a barely functional EPFO website DPI? Is the app that is used by Anganwadi workers DPI? is each municipal corporation's website that barely functions and does not let you upload high resolution documents without you first having to go to like a third party free website to compress it and thereby compromise your own personal data. Is that DPI? The government doesn't seem to think so, as far as I've understood. A major fallacy within the entire DPI project, including our big identity project Aadhaar, is that DPI or digital solutions will somehow magically solve your problems of physical infrastructure and societal problems. So, FASTag will get you a pothole free highway which is devoid of jaywalkers somehow. UPI will get you scam free, uninterrupted services where service providers are also somehow making money without actually earning through merchant discount rate. ONDC will somehow magically link your buyer apps with your seller apps, even though neither side of the apps has any incentive to only offer one service. And somehow having a health ID will solve the problem of just ridiculously bad healthcare system for most of this country. So the reason I mentioned EPFO in particular earlier was because I was supposed to link Aadhaar to my biometrics to claim Provident Fund, which is something that I've earned. And I'm forced to put certain amount of my salary in Provident Fund. And that brings me to the entire idea of how Aadhaar is based on an idea where every government service is then seen as a subsidy. So what certain citizen rights have now been reduced to states' largesse, that it is a subsidy rather than your right or service and therefore produce Aadhaar. So a service such as the ability to file taxes, the ability to get your driving license, to register your own property is all linked to you giving your Aadhaar details, even though these are not subsidies. And then the government, as Usha ma'am said, amended the Aadhaar rules in January to enable private entities access to Aadhaar authentication. Although that authentication needs to be vetted by first UIDAI and then approved by MeitY, the IT Ministry, through a Gazette notification. My bigger problem with this idea of service versus subsidy is actually evidenced in Section 7 of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which is a section related to legitimate uses. And I just want to go into the legislative history for a very short 10 seconds. This section was earlier called the section about personal data processing without consent. And that is the key giveaway. And now these legitimate uses are described allow the state and its instrumentalities access to any personal data that it has collected in the past in any form, physical or digital, to provide any subsidy, benefit, service, certificate, license, or permit. So the point is, as a citizen, whenever I'm interacting with the state, one of these is always involved. Whether it be getting my ration, whether it be getting a health service from a government hospital, whether it be getting service from a private hospital if I'm taking it as a road accident victim, or it be getting a permit to set up a hand cart on the road, because you need permits for that as well. So then the question arises that what exactly is DPI? Who's the public? What is the infrastructure? I mean, last week Indian Express reported how the government is looking to build India Energy Stack. And Mr. Neelkan is actually involved in, I think he's the chairperson of the committee. And Hindu Business Line the same day reported that the government is building something called the cooperative stack. This morning, the Hindu reported on how on May 30, the government mandated that getting Aadhaar-based facial authentication of beneficiaries of Anganwadi efforts is obligatory. And the Anganwadi worker said that that has made their life much harder. The app barely works, and because of which the beneficiaries are denied these benefits. In fact, we've reached a point where you can just bundle any noun and the word stack, and it is somehow a DPI. So Pranay, I can see your spectacles right now. Soon we might have spectacle stack. Sorry, spectacles stack, because stacks arguably by themselves are a spectacle. And
Right.
the problem that all these different stacks are trying to solve is still a mystery. And that brings us to the question of consent as well, that as DPI are thrust upon a citizenry and non-digital options are at times slowly and at times suddenly phased out, consent is honestly often meaningless given the immense power asymmetry between one individual and the state. There is enough red tape in the process that, as Usha ma'am said, if you're a daily wage laborer, you're not going to argue against someone and say, hey, I'm not going to give you my Aadhaar. If you are at the risk of potentially being struck off the electoral rolls, uh, I think this is the headline that Indian Express had 2 or 3 days ago, that they have no other document other than Aadhaar. You have no choice but to give it, even if it's not a proof of citizenship. And in the face of AI, which is seen as uncritically inevitable positive progression, privacy principles are rapidly being eroded and argued against, as evidenced by a certain op ed that appeared in Mint, I think, 3 weeks ago. And what is not taken into account is that when you're talking about when people who are promoting DPI, they talk about exclusions from DPI as a rounding error. What is forgotten in the process is that even a 0.1% of 1.4 billion is 1.4 million people. So a certain violence seems to underscore the entire DPI project, which reduces living, breathing human beings to binary numbers that can be negated off as within margin of error, so to say. So who
Right.
can say
Yeah.
no? And the answer is
Yeah.
honestly nobody. Sorry,
Right.
I've taken
No,
too.
no, no, that's okay. No, thank you for that. I think the one common theme that I was able to sort of pick up from all of your opening remarks was the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty as to what the DPI project in India is, what sort of a core public interest it's trying to serve. So what is it essentially resulting in? Is it expanding the capacity of the state for governance? Is it resulting in private sector centralization? Or is it empowering citizens? So what is it exactly causing? So yeah, uh, uh, Ritika, if you could go first, please.
Right. So I've written about this somewhere in passing that, there are digital technologies that have had the effect of enhancing administrative capacity. And when those technologies, digital technologies, have been used, they have been quite helpful in bringing efficiency to these systems. And one easy example is the computerization of the PDS database that began in the early 2000s and became compulsory by the time the National Food Security Act was passed in 2013. But I would say that this Aadhaar type technology is depleting administrative capacity, and it's wasting a lot of people's time, right? It's wasting our time when we need to fix something, right? So some of us may be able to do it online, and because they have some online facilities apparently for changing your demographic details. But a lot of the time people end up going to these correction centers. These correction centers are fly by night operations to some extent. They can charge anything they want, they can turn back anyone they want. Many times they don't know what needs to be done. Even if I'm a well intentioned customer service center provider, I'm not able to figure out all these error codes. And in any case, it's above my pay grade. So I have to kick up the person. Recently, we found this video which we put out also, someone put out, of a very long queue outside the Aadhaar Correction Center in Ranchi, which is, I think, the regional headquarter for Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal. I think there are still only 8, or maybe they've increased it a little bit. I'm a bit out of touch. But it's mind boggling, right? How can you, first of all, say you will not get A, B, C, D, E, F, Z, and then not have the provision to actually, ensure that their records are in order? Why not make all post offices and all gram panchayats where there is at least the possibility of ensuring some accountability? So, in many different ways, it's depleted administrative capacity to, especially at the level, especially for the poor. For people like us, this is the really pernicious thing about digital tools, is that they work really well for one segment, and that segment happens to be the one who has all the power, political power, a voice on Twitter, etc., etc. And they don't work at all. They're a disaster for people who are not part of these power elite, or whatever you want to call them. And so their reality is denied. It's not even seen by most people. So this is another really pernicious aspect of these digital tools that needs to be highlighted. I'll stop.
No, thank you for that. I think again another aspect that you all had highlighted was the fact that the purpose of this project, it was very unclear what it was trying to serve. So my next question is sort of regarding what kind of regulatory assessment, in your opinions, is required for governance, public interest, accountability, privacy, apart from the operational metrics in implementing such a system. Usha ma'am, if you could respond to this question, please.
I mean, yours is a very aspirational question. The aspiration is that there can be regulation. And also, I think the whole point about this exercise has been that it has to be above the law. So they keep, if you look at what happened, the 2025 rules are a classic example of how you decide what you want and then you make rules to fit that, even if it's completely and directly contrary to what the project was supposedly set up for. Actually, it's the opposite. So I don't know that regulation is intended. The first thing, maybe just to take Aditi's discussion forward, if we are to look at what is DPI, maybe one of the ways of thinking about it is the infrastructure that has been created by them, which also banks to quite an extent on the possibility of ubiquity. So when you say it has to be in EPFO, it has to be everywhere. Then what we are saying is that if it is everywhere, they'll be able to aggregate all this data and do whatever they think they want to do with it. So just taking that distinction between, it's only a fine distinction, but to see if there is a distinction between the infrastructure, if you make a road and then you're doing other things which are alongside it, maybe, how do you make a road function? What are the kind of things that you want to do? It's not a great analogy. This is a Nilakani analogy, so obviously it's not a great analogy. But, to say that you have, the thing to remember is that in the creation of whatever this infrastructure is that they've created digitally, they have found it necessary to practice coercion. They have found it that it cannot be done if privacy is going to be respected. That the purpose for which this has to be done can be served only if the idea of the digital is ubiquitous, that every database gets linked up with it, partly because that will mean that everyone, we'll fall into one or the other of those various databases, and we'll then have to go and put our number in there, which means we have to generate the number. So that idea of ubiquity. I think another way of approaching this thing of digital public infrastructure, I mean, of course, the other thing is that they are looking at finance, they are looking at health, they are looking at education, the various kinds of places where they think they can get in and create products which they can then sell. This is just about corporatization of private information and using that so that it can create markets for it. And they'll use, I think Bill Gates said it very honestly when he said in a recent interview that for him, India is a place where he conducts his experiments. He said, we try various things in India. If it works, then we take it to other countries. So India has the remarkable, we are in a remarkable position where we are going to be the guinea pigs for the whole world. And that happened. It's not like they didn't try in other places. They tried in other places. Other places were more resistant. The Indian establishment and the corporate sector got together and they felt that it was all right. That's why we are where we are. So the thing about this is that, one of the things that recently we noticed was, and Reetika, you can tell us a little bit about this too, which is the World Bank saying that, we are now more equal than almost any other country and that our poverty level has just dramatically dropped. Why? Because we are doing DBT and money is being put into accounts, and therefore our poverty level has dropped dramatically. Everybody has a certain amount of money. How can we be poor? So this, recognizing how it can be politically used is one thing. And the other way in which it's politically used is that, you can't generate employment. You can't have education of any value, which will, upgrade people's lives. Malnutrition, stunting, you take anything, all parameters when it comes to the rights of people down. So what is it that you can do? How are you going to get the people on your side? Put money into their account. So actually, if you look at it, at least my understanding, and I mean, Reetika will know far better than me what this is, but that, when you use just money, putting money into people's accounts as a method of doing things, we've said it about hospitals, for instance, that you don't have any medical facility. What's the point in saying that I will reimburse whatever? Where is the facility in the first place? You have to create those facilities. So this idea that I put in money and my job is done with this whole set of people who are a burden on the system, that seems to be driving all of this. And I think, I mean, our moderator is gone, so I'm going to be immoderate. No, I won't. So I'm saying that, so when we see it, we need to see the digital public infrastructure as the infrastructure. The various places where they put it, ask us to introduce that number, becomes about ubiquity, about it being everywhere, and therefore being able to garner information about everyone. And that makes it fine for a government to be able to tell people that something has been done, because you just have to take taxpayers' money and put it into a number of accounts. And it's as if the job of the state is done. So all the things that Reetika was referring to, Aditi was referring to, about the failures of the system and the compulsions of the system, get pushed to the side. There is no place for it. So and the very interesting thing in this is that the state only consults with a certain small set of people. It's almost like we don't have 1.4 billion population. We have only 4 people in our population. And those 4 people will decide what kind of technology, what it should be applied for, who is entitled to what problems should be acknowledged or not, what is the solution and what is the problem. And that will include people like Sharad Sharma, Sanjay Jain, that Verma, Mr. Verma, this Nilakani. These are the people who are... Yeah, so and Ram Sevak Sharma. So they become like a little team which will go around from place to place and say what it should be. And they are the ones, if you look at G22, they were the ones in the forefront promoting it. And some among them are being represented as civil society. So if in a UN body or in anything else, they say, civil society should be represented, they will represent because they're civil society. So I think we need to take the blinkers off on many things for us to be able to see these things more clearly. That's going to be the first big task. And one more quick intervention, which is that there is no acknowledgement of the lack of safety that this is bringing into every individual's life. You think about what happened in Iran, where they actually picked and found scientists where they were and shot them dead. This didn't happen without being able to track them, trail them, see them, surveil them. You set up systems of this kind, that's what you're going to do. They may not be shooting people down, but there will be, during COVID, we saw various ways in which people were getting targeted. So I really think, whoever is listening in, that we need to go back and see, first of all, what that infrastructure is. But we also need to see how much we are contributing as data to this by putting our number in multiple places. How much the poor have no choice at all. Because Justice Sikri, in his great eagerness to somehow make this law valid, constitutional, he found one way where Section 7 of the Aadhaar Act would, it is to deal with poor, it is to deal with provision of services. Let's make it constitutional. But that has meant that this coercion is not even a question when it comes to the poor. And they are the ones who are getting hit by it the most. So actually, a project that started with saying that we are going to deal with fakes and ghosts are actually creating fakes and ghosts. As we can see when we are talking about Maharashtra elections and what is happening in the database, as we can see in what is happening now in Bihar, where they are dealing with a database where people might just vanish from it. So I'm just saying that, we can't limit the discussion of a DPI. We really need to open it out. This discussion should serve to open it out for many people listening.
Right. Thank you, ma'am, for that. And then that's the intention with this session. Ritika, would you like to respond to Usha ma'am's response to this?
Yeah, I could say a little bit, but I don't want to eat into Aditi's time in case Aditi wants to. Okay. So there are a bunch of things. I don't want to get into the broader issues that Usha raised about cash transfers and what they do to politics, etc. Maybe just in passing. But you said one thing a couple of times, so I thought I should mention it, which is the purpose of Aadhaar. And there are very interesting parallels between what happened here with UID and what happened in the UK 20 years ago when they were trying to bring a digital ID there. And it was exactly the same script. Basically, you say it is this, then people catch you out on that. So for instance, or you say welfare theek ho jayega, and then people catch your lies. So then you say, oh, this will stop terrorism. So then somebody else comes along, the security experts come along and catch your lies. And so it keeps reinventing itself. And I think Aditi is right that, this is just a loose term. And so if Aadhaar is getting vilified, you start using DPI, or rather India Stack. And then when India Stack is exposed for some of its odd activities, as it was in 2016 by Kiran Janalagada, then you become DPI. So you kind of recreate yourself new and improved so that people don't really understand that it's actually the same thing, but the packing has changed. So that was one thing. The second thing that I wanted to mention was about your regulatory framework kind of question. Just one thing is that, see, GDPR is a good law, or was a good law. And even with GDPR, it has created it's still, the problems haven't gone away. And GDPR is operating in a socio-economic context where people are literate, they have digital literacy, they have financial literacy, etc. There's much stronger protection and awareness of privacy. And yet, it's not been able to go all the way, right? So even if you have a good law in India, you're not going to be able to regulate. Like, what does a poor Narega worker do if she is swindled of some money? Right? How is she going to get it back on digital arrest or whatever it is if that happens to her? She's going to be pitted against the UIDAI or some very far off entity, and how is she going to fight that battle? It's very unequal. And the other thing which I should have said perhaps earlier is that, when Aadhaar appeared on the scene, it was really being projected as something that would take away, yes, there is corruption in these programs. A lot of my work before Aadhaar came on the scene was about documenting the corruption and the mechanisms of corruption and the scale of corruption, etc. But the fact is, you come along on with your shining armor and you say that this digital technology is going to fix all the problems, but actually the digital technology is going to be implemented by the same corrupt system. So how can it magically take away all and it's not just about corruption, it's also about how thin the state is at that level. So, now these APAR IDs are being created for children. They say it's voluntary, but in fact it's compulsory. And I was just for a short while in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, and the teachers are not doing teaching anymore. They are either attending meetings or they are doing other paperwork. And now on top of that, in any case, they have very little teaching time. They're now creating APAR IDs and struggling with Aadhaar related issues because this one girl, her teacher said that her name is Swati, but in the Aadhaar card, she has been made Salty, and she's stuck, and her parents, the father has a thela, so he can't really spend 3-4. Then she said, the teacher said that, it's going to take 3 or 4 days if they're lucky to get it fixed. And the parents are almost reconciled to letting her be made Salty. But even that's not easy, because for that, they have to change her name in the UDICE database for it to match with the Aadhaar database. But changing things on the UDICE database is not trivial either. So that was the second thing. And then the third one, which Usha actually mentioned a little bit about Israel, Iran, etc. I was at LSE because these LSE people who prepared that report 20 years ago, they were organizing a celebration of 20 years of the LSE identity report. Partly because it seems like a digital ID is back on the cards in the UK. So they're kind of waiting and watching to see whether they need to, ramp up their campaign again and update, etc. But Gus Hussain, who was there also, he said that, somebody asked, is there a way out? And so he said in response to that, given all this remilitarization that's happening across the world, and given how vulnerable Israel is making itself by having all these centralized data, that actually it's like, if at all it ever happens, it's likely to come from those, because of the security concerns that those kinds of militarized states are going to throw up. So I thought I'll just share that because I thought it was quite a remarkable kind of comment. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Ritika. Yeah, and I think as you had mentioned in your opening remarks as well as in the responses to the previous question, and Usha ma'am did as well. You talked about barriers, how the nature of it being ubiquitous has now made it a stronger mechanism for exclusion in our country. So, Aditi, my next question is for you. So, from your experience on reporting and on the ground realities, what barriers exist for marginalized groups to use, and if there is any benefit from DPI?
So I'll preface this by saying that I haven't done a lot of reporting on marginalized groups and their use of DPI, particularly Aadhaar. I have done it more from the policy side and how the government is thinking about it. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, the inability to say no. You can't say that, hey, I'm not going to give you Aadhaar. Or if you're going to say get a new SIM at Airtel, you can't say, hey, I don't want to use UPI. You can have a 10 rupee note and they'll say, nope, we need UPI. I'm like, why is my 10 rupee note not good enough? Second, who can say no? Which goes back to the point that Usha ma'am said, that when we are restructuring the debate as where the idea of giving subsidies through Aadhaar is made a constitutional mandate almost. I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong legal parlance, but if it's constitutionally validated, then the the marginalized, the disenfranchised, they can't really say no. In my life, I have felt helpless with respect to Aadhaar only once, which is when my grandfather was in the hospital with COVID. My parents and I had to undergo COVID tests, and they demanded Aadhaar to carry out the test. And my brain was screaming at me, you know better, you report on these things. Arogya Setu doesn't work. You don't need to download it. Aadhaar is not going to help you with contact tracing. You shouldn't be giving it. You're going to send it to this hospital via email. They are not accepting a redacted copy. They are not accepting a virtual ID because they don't know about it. My brain was screaming at me, but I couldn't say no because it was literally a matter of life and death. And when a person like me who comes from immense privilege comes across that and can't say no, people who are on the margins live that way every day. And that is something that is not recognized. And for at least people like me, you, Pranay, or Ritika, or Usha ma'am, no random person on the street can demand to see our papers or our Aadhaar. But those who live in the margins are asked by everybody. Like if a domestic help comes to your house, you demand to see their Aadhaar. A Zomato worker goes to a fancy society or even a middle class society for that matter. The guard asks to see Aadhaar and input that number in MyGate. So there is no place where they can't be asked and where they can say no. And they have no recourse because, as Ritika explained with that example of the parents of the child named Swati, getting these problems fixed, fighting against the big state takes time. It means losing out on wages. So that is something people can't do. Then the third, it's not a barrier, but rather the promise of convenience, which is something we see more than Aadhaar with UPI, where it is so seamlessly now integrated into people's lives that people are like, why are you using cash? Why are you using a credit card? Why are you using a debit card? UPI makes life so much easier. We are splitting the bill. It's just so much easier. But what happens when UPI breaks, when it's not functioning? And that brings me to a larger point that I want to make about infrastructure and DPI, where DPI is almost like that sexy, visible infrastructure that garners people great headlines. That, ooh, DPI magically solve pothole problems. Ooh, DPI magically solve the problem of no hospitals and no doctors, and quacks basically giving you sugar pills. Uh, and that is where I want to borrow this idea from Susan Lee Starr's foundational work on infrastructure, where she said that infrastructure is usually so seamless and functional that it is invisible until it breaks down. And it's the unsexy job of maintaining that infrastructure. So new flyover, very visible, but you forget that it exists once it starts functioning. But when it breaks down, then it's a huge issue. And we have repeatedly seen those like UPI has almost now become invisibilized, but its maintenance hasn't really worked out because who's going to maintain it? The service providers are supposed to maintain it, but they are not earning from it. So it's not a financially sustainable system, a DPI solution, because there's only so much subsidy that the government can also provide. Other forms of DPI, interestingly enough, perhaps do not fit this definition of invisible infrastructure because that kind of infrastructure is forced upon you. So, use of ONDC, like it doesn't work, but it's forced upon you, use it. Use of Aadhaar, use it. Use of Aadhaar ID, use it. And that's the coercion that there is no seamless intertwining with people's lives. So, or when you're forced to store, say, school documents in DigiLocker. So that seamlessness, and that breaks down, say, for instance, when you lose your number. And the big promise of Aadhaar, this one big ID, this one ID that will stay with you for the rest of your life, was that you will not need to use any other IDs. But authorities themselves are saying, hey, Aadhaar doesn't work, which is why they want family IDs. Like I remember I had attended a UIDAI event where I believe, but I could be wrong about this, I think it was the Chief Secretary of Haryana who said that there are so many errors with Aadhaar that we can't use it. That is why we are coming up with our own ID system and creating a family ID. This was back in 22, I think summer of 22. Jammu and Kashmir is implementing a family ID system. RBI is saying that, hey, we want a brand new ID system to track all your tax related documentation and your taxes and your finances, etc. Whatever happened to PAN? Whatever happened to linking PAN with Aadhaar? Whatever happened to Aadhaar? So none of these things seem to be working out. And a lot of it goes down to really, as I said earlier, and as Ritika illustrated with the examples, to certain social problems. We are a country with so many languages. Our naming system varies from state to state, if not district to district. You cannot just bracket people into those Aadhaar related fields. Like my grandfather had 2 dates of birth. Simply because he was born at a time when birth certificates were not a thing. It's just that he was educated, so he had one official date of birth, which worked for Aadhaar. He had like 3 different spellings of his last name and his first name. So when I had to get his death certificate done, I was like, oh crap, what name is going to turn up and where are they going to flag the entire process? Because these systems rely on computers which do not allow for discretion. And I agree, that kind of human discretion also creates room for corruption. But that lack of discretion also excludes the room for humanity, for understanding nuance, for understanding culture, socio-cultural specific contexts. And that is where violence is meted out to people. So for instance, first name, last name concept, or family name / surname versus first name concept, it varies across cultures in this country. Certain names are very long, they don't fit an Aadhaar. I'll give you a very simple example, which is a very elitist example. Uh, if you have a very long name and you want to transfer your credit card points to say one of these hotel loyalty points, and you are giving them Aadhaar as proof of government ID because some of them ask for it, it doesn't work because Aadhaar only fits a certain number of characters. So you have created like a Marriott account with 30 characters. Aadhaar fits, I don't know, however many. And Marriott is like, hey, I'm not going to accept your points. Now, this is a very elitist problem. But now imagine how this problem happens at a large scale when it comes to, say, for instance, dispersal of public subsidies, dispersal of food crates, dispersal of ration, dispersal is not the right word, but providing people with free education, which is a state mandated duty. Which is the state's duty, sorry. So that is where problems occur. And those are the problems that honestly the state is not acknowledging enough.
Right, and exactly. And I think what your response is sort of it really leads into my next question, which is like, um, have these structures, infrastructure, have they really created real financial inclusion? And then what are the technical, economic, systemic safeguards in place? So Usha ma'am, first, if you could respond to this question, please.
Yeah, I might have to kind of answer it not directly, not a direct answer to your question, because I think the question presumes many things, that the system was set up so that people can get access. I don't think that was the purpose of the system at all. And the DPI is actually one manifestation to explain why this was, the purpose was business, the purpose was not people. People had to be fodder to that business, which is why if people fall by the wayside, if they can't identify themselves, if they have problems, they have very clearly said, if you can't get yourself identified by the system, it's your problem, not the problem of the system and not my problem. The whole onus is only on the individual, because it's not the individual who's of interest. Say they get 60 to 70% of the people on many databases which they can look at and do whatever they want. That's enough for them. For business, that's more than enough. They don't need to be accurate. So to create the products that they are creating, accuracy is not really, especially when you're passing on the liability or the onus of inaccuracy to the individual. They really don't need to worry about it. And I just move from there into another. See, there is one thing that bothers me about many things that happen around us. What we see happening in Palestine is one classic example of that. But it is happening really everywhere around us. That we are all presuming that the state should act for the poor, and will act for the poor even if it does it badly. Maybe they're just inefficient. Maybe their ambitions are somewhere else, and therefore they are not doing it. I honestly am not convinced at all when I look at the way technology has moved, that technology is interested in people. Technology controllers and technology creators, they are not interested one bit in persons in various conditions of poverty. They only use, unless the people who are poor can be of use to the technology, and to the extent that they can be useful to the technology, they are interested in the poor. So the only interest in the poor so far has been that we will use the poor to provide the logic and the reason for creating the database. We will create, in fact, the first report which TCS prepared in 1999 actually says that we need to create this, give this ID. We need to create it. And the best way to do it is to start with places where people don't have a choice to refuse. For instance, food and rations. So this is not something that just happened. That is the plan. That's why they didn't care if biometrics won't work. If fingerprint doesn't work, we'll try iris. Iris doesn't work, we'll try face. If nothing works, we'll do OTP anyway, and we'll figure it out. But we need all of them in various forms and shapes as data. And if the data is inaccurate here, then you can still create businesses on it. So the one thing I think that's been consistent since 2010 in the Indian context has been that the problem every time that has been brought to the fore in the context of persons in various conditions of poverty, every time it is brought to the fore, it is not even addressed. Jean and Reetika will have to write a piece, or Jean will have to write a piece saying whatever. Then because they have a name and they will get noticed, that will get publicly addressed. But the problem will continue to persist, because that is not the point. So as I see it, the build up to the DPI is the India stack. And the DPI is the interest, because actually I think DPI is also a statement of the failure of the proponents of the project, because they thought if they have all this data, they're going to become the AI kings and of the world. I was going to say and queens, but I don't think there are any particular queens there. So that that they'll rule the world with this. In all of the developing world, they'll have the data, and then they will be creating all these AI whatever. Now, if you look, the money that the government is investing in AI, it's all been given to the same UID people and same Mr. Nilakani people that Sarvam AI. So it's really like a small set of people taking public money, taking the coercion of the state, taking absence of liability, being able to put the whole onus on the people. It's a small group of people who are working with the state. who promise the state access to the people in a certain kind of way, which suits the state. Whether it is DBT and putting money into people's public money into people's accounts and saying it's come from me, or it is in any other form. So I really think that it's a very hard thing to accept, because it's very hard to, about what to do when we realize that people who are producing these technologies really don't give a damn about the poor, because they control so much. You wonder what will happen in the lives of the poor if this happens. And one of the things seems to be, there was a Bill Gates video where he had said how if you look at the population of the world from 1900 to 2000, you see that the number goes up, and it goes up hugely. It goes up 4 times and 5 times. So he's asking in that video, when Melinda and I thought, should we go to Africa and give vaccines to those children there? Won't it just increase the population there? And then he says, but then we thought, actually, if we give vaccines and it saves the lives of some of those children, maybe they won't have so many children. So there is a way in which you're saying that the poor should not have so many children. If we give vaccines, it may save their lives. Should we give them vaccines or not? Oh, if we save their lives, then there may not be so many children. What does this conversation tell us? So I just think the harder conversation too needs to be had. DPI is the only product, it's a pathetic product, but that's the only product that they've been able to come up with, and they are trying desperately to sell it around the world, using particularly UPI as their model child. But it's not more than that. What it really reflects for us, at least, I think this is something to be seriously considered, is that it is a statement that the poor that they are a drag. And they will be given something and their mouth shut up with it. And if they can't keep it, let them find their own way to whatever they can get. So it's a very depressing thought. I'm sorry towards the end of the thing, and I'm depressing everybody, but I think a little amount of depression is needed for a reality check in this context.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Ritika, if there's anything that you'd like to add to what Usha ma'am said.
I'll quickly say one thing. Many years ago, when Aadhaar was still relatively new, there was a journalist to whom I said, Aadhaar was like it came in 2009-10, right? After the 8-9 financial crisis. And I kind of said to him, and I said, don't use my name, because I was shy to say it at that time. But I was saying Aadhaar was like the Narega for the IT industry in India. And it's that analogy kind of works, but not quite, because through NREG, at least some useful assets have been created. Right? In rural areas, you have some mango orchards, you have some wells, you have some fish ponds, whatever, some roads, which are fair weather roads, etc. But this Aadhaar, and it came back to me when Aditi was talking about, all the problems, and so they can't work with this database. Then they said, अच्छा अभी सर्वम ले आओ, अब सर्वम नहीं चल रहा तो अभी अपार ले आओ, अब अपार नहीं चल रहा तो कुछ और ले आएंगे. So that kind of it's a never-ending thing. There'll never be enough IDs, it seems, even though it's completely contrary to the original vision, if one wants to call it that your ID will walk with you, and you will not need, if you open a wallet, you find so many different IDs. He used to say all this. And when Aadhaar comes, then you won't need all these things. But in fact, Aadhaar is spawning it's having more children than poor people are having in other parts of the world. The other point was also related to the kind of thing that Aditi was bringing up. And I think this Daniel Solov's work on, the analogy between the Aadhaar type databases and Big Brother, not so much Big Brother, but rather the trial by Kafka, the Kafkaesque nature of it, where his pension can no longer continue because the bank's database doesn't have space for age to be 3 digits. It stops at 99, and this person is 106 years old. So it's poor design. It's just sloppy design, very small things. But this also goes back to what I was saying earlier, that, if your implementation machinery is weak and poorly trained and unaccountable and not motivated and not properly paid, then they're going to do a sloppy job, no matter, even if this technology was new and shiny and foolproof, etc. it's going to be implemented by human beings who are either unmotivated or corrupt or not adequately trained, don't have enough infrastructure. And so you can kind of get the mess that you're getting across different dimensions of people's lives.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that, Ritika. I have quite a few questions lined up, but in the interest of time, I would request, and Vignesh is also mentioned in the public chat, if the participants who've joined us here today, if they have any questions, they can unmute themselves or drop their messages, drop their questions in the chat box. So yeah.
Put all of them to sleep.
Definitely not, Ritika. Yes, we have a question from Prashant. From subsidies, now we have Aadhaar being mandated for goods services sold at a premium. Example being the Tatkal tickets, the recent development with the Aadhaar-based authentication. Aditi had also pointed out earlier. So, of course, these scams continue. I mean, any brief thoughts on this, on how it has been sort of expanded?
So, at that time, when initially, like from 2010 to 2015, a bunch of us were crying ourselves hoarse about how, the kind of claims that the UIDAI was making about what Aadhaar could do for welfare programs, they were completely unfounded, and that in principle, they couldn't fix the problem of, say, duplication and ghost beneficiaries, etc. And nobody was really listening to us. And then around 2014, 15, 16, the government started putting pressure to link your mobile, your bank account, etc. with Aadhaar. And when it came to their doorstep, then the so-called middle class and upper middle class, they woke up and they said, hey, what's the duplication here? What's the corruption here? And I think then they began to see the problem, or perhaps the possibility that what they had been told earlier was questionable. And then, of course, the discourse changed suddenly. Everyone was talking about privacy, especially after Rachna Khaira's work, story in Chandigarh. So I think this also is a telling kind of comment on the nature of Indian society, politics, etc., democracy, that basically as long as we are cool, everything is cool. And but once it comes to our doorstep, so maybe this Tatkal ticket, I think that it should be made compulsory for airline tickets. Then we'll see.
Right. Thank you,
Then it
Ritika.
might give a jolt.
Right. Thank you, Ritika. Usha, ma'am, if you have anything to add to what Ritika has just stated.
Can you just repeat what the question was? Listening to
It wasn't a
Reetika, I forgot
question.
the
So,
question.
yes, yes. So, no, it wasn't a question particularly, but Prashant had highlighted how Aadhaar is being mandated for goods and services and it's being sold at a premium. For instance, like with the recent development with the e-Tatkal uh,
Right,
uh,
right, right.
ticket booking requiring Aadhaar-based authentication. So, just if you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
any thoughts.
Actually, I find it fascinating. I mean, I just do from whatever newspapers come, we get 6, 7 newspapers, and every day you look, in a week you can get at least 5, 6, 7, 10 sometimes cases where the UIDs got misused. I think today's paper has, yesterday's paper had, where this is the easiest thing to get, to forge, to cheat with. It's just incredible. And yet you'll find, I mean, here yesterday's or today's paper talks about this huge fraud that was committed. I mean, not fraud, the drugs. The man in Kerala who sat and sent drugs out through the Indian postal service. And the answer that they're saying that they use, in that is just one line which says Aadhaar is used fraudulently. So now what do they want? They want that it should be used well. So they say continue with it, but get authentication, verification done through this. So there is something that has happened which has killed the Indian imagination. where we don't seem to be able to go beyond this. And I must say, I give Mr. Nilekani the Nobel for marketing crap as diamond. I mean, it's incredible. This thing fails everywhere. It gets abused by everyone everywhere. But they've managed to make everyone believe that you can't live without it. So, a lot of this has to do, see, in any country where we want to safeguard liberty, and these are all very, core, it's connected with liberty. For that, the population has to believe in liberty. And when I say liberty, it means that you recognize the power of the state and you believe that the power of the state should constantly be kept in check. If we accept the state as a bully and the friends of the state as bullies who can bully us and we will get cowed down, then I think we can have many conversations, but we will never have freedom or liberty. And they are not, in fact, I was fascinated recently in another course that I was taking. I did this little thing on constitutional morality. And when Ambedkar talks about constitutional morality, he has three elements that he says in it. One, he says that, it's about freedom. The second thing he says, it is about self-restraint. It's not about being restrained by somebody, but self-restraint. And the third is that the absence of coercion. It's a constitutional principle that you do not. And where is he saying this? He's saying this when he's explaining to people why our constitution is so large and why he has said so much about the administration in the constitution. He says if we don't put it here, then they will be coercive. They will be, of course, he was also referring to coercion in the context of Gandhi. He said there should be no, protest and dharna and all that. It should not be where you're coercing your views on anybody else. But he was also using freedom, self-restraint, and coercion when he was talking about administration. Now we have only a coercive administration. Nobody talks to you, nobody consults with you, nobody wants to know what you think. They say, I say, you do. That's all. That's your job. And I'm saying, as a people, if we don't know how to at least not accept this as normal, then the place we are in. And also we must remember, and that's something every time Reetika talks, it's an important thing to remember. There are many of us we can do without our freedom and liberty, because without freedom and liberty, we have so much privilege. Of course, those who value freedom and liberty cannot live without it. It's like being suffocated. But this kind of our giving up and saying, "Are kya kare? This is the new normal," actually oppresses a whole sections of people who are getting completely kicked out of the system. And we owe a responsibility to that. And I don't think we acknowledge when Reetika said, when they said it is for mobile phones and bank accounts, and suddenly everybody woke up, because that idea of fraternity, which also Ambedkar spoke about, we don't have. We don't care. We don't notice it. When a child died in Jharkhand because they could not link up their, the number, UID number with the ration system, nobody reacted. Only the same set of people who watch and who care and who. How can we be a country without compassion like this and expect that we'll have freedom and liberty? So it is important. And I know I'm going far from it now, but when Dalai Lama witnessed in Europe, they called him and asked him to see various kinds of technologies that were being used on children with disability. It was actually very moving to see those technologies being used. And they asked him at the end of it, what do you say? And he said, I think it's very good that you're doing this, that you're paying attention to children and their needs. And, this is really service that you're doing. But remember one thing, that you cannot replicate this for all the poor people in the world. You cannot replicate this for every child in Africa who's going through a thing like this. There is only one thing that can be universal, and that is compassion. So I don't think we should leave the language of compassion out of our consideration when we are looking at systems that are so oppressive, coercive, and exclusionary.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Aditi, do you have anything to add to what Ritika and Usha ma'am just said?
Not really, not on this question, definitely.
Okay. All right. I am looking at the chat box. I'll just check if we have any questions.
How can we make UIDI liable for their
Yes.
blunders? It's so hard.
If if you have any
I can
thoughts, Ritika. Okay, great. Go ahead,
Let
Aditi.
Aditi, it's above my pay grade.
So this question about how we can make UIDAI liable, I don't think as far as I know, the act doesn't provide for it, and any attempt like to put public pressure on holding UIDAI liable has also not really worked, because every time there is any conversation about breach of Aadhaar data, they're like, hey, our CIDR, the identity repository, central identity repository, is perfectly safe, because as someone very famously said in the court, that it's behind 13 feet of concrete. It's when we share it with other entities, they leak it. So they pass the buck. That's number one. Number two, there was recently this case. I was trying to find the reference for it, but it happened in the last 20 days. I'm sure of that. It was an article in Hindustan Middle Papers, where some kind of data had leaked, something had happened, and the current UIDAI CEO said that the system is perfect. The technical system is perfect, Aadhaar is perfect, it's completely safe, but we can't do anything if some people are abusing it. So there is an assumption that technical systems such as Aadhaar are somehow completely technical and exist in a vacuum, and they're not socio-technical system, which is something that those of us who have studied technological determinism versus social construction of technology, etc., kind of debates, know that is not true. Every technology exists as a socio-technical system, and which is what Usha ma'am was also talking about, which is what Ritika also mentioned, that how do you account for the inherent corruption in the people who are operating these systems? So that is something that, again, there is no liability for that. Again, there is no response even within, say, UIDAI or METI. There is not enough information. People are not knowledgeable enough on when Aadhaar is mandatory and when it's not. And part of that problem arises from the fact that Aadhaar has now become a common noun for any kind of identity. So some random security guard might ask you for your Aadhaar and you give them your driving license. It works. They don't really mean Aadhaar. But what happens as a result of it is that a lot of people who don't have alternate forms of ID, they just give their Aadhaar. So that's become commonplace. The same way UPI has almost become, not completely, but almost become a common noun for payments. And that is another way in which it's not made liable. Even in this case from Bombay High Court, if I remember correctly, against Yes Bank, where a cost of 50,000 was imposed on the Yes Bank for demanding Aadhaar, I went through the order, and the cost is not imposed for violating the Supreme Court judgment on Section 57, striking down Section 57. It's actually imposed for Yes Bank violating their own word from 2018 that we won't make Aadhaar mandatory. So that is also a nuance that we need to take into account. Like, why are larger questions not asked of UIDI? And when courts are going through some of these cases, why are they not saying, hey, why did you not do the due diligence for the downstream processor for leaking data? For instance, in DPDP Act, if your data processor, which is the downstream processor, has a data breach, there can be liability imposed on the data fiduciary. So why is that same logic not extended to UIDAI? And that is something that needs to be considered.
Right. Thank you, Aditi. And I mean, all of these questions, all of your concluding thoughts, this is something that we will be subsequently unpacking in our following sessions. But in the interest of time, I would I would I would be closing this session now. And apologies to everyone whose questions were left unaddressed. But yeah, this with this we come to the end of our session today. Thank you to all the attendees who participated and joined us here today. Thank you again to our esteemed panelists who chose to take time out of their busy schedules and contribute to the discourse on this very important topic. Finally, I thank the entire SFLC.in team for their passion, hard work in helping in organizing this event. Goodbye, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow for day 2 of DPI in Conversation. Thank you, everyone.